Great. So, welcome. So, good evening. Thank you for joining us. My name's Jen Miroff, and I'm the chair of the Legislative Action Committee. And on behalf of the League of Women Voters of Massachusetts, Executive Director Celia Canavan, and Board Presidents Courtney Henderson and Courtney Rao Rogers, welcome to Demystifying the State Budget. We are very excited to host Eliza Lutz, Budget and Policy Advisor for State Senator Pat Jehlen. Our goal for tonight is to learn how the annual state budget gets across the finish line. We know the League's mission is to empower voters and defend democracy. The League is nonpartisan in that we do not endorse political parties or candidates, but we do take positions on issues through study and consensus. And you can visit our website, lwvma.org/advocacy, to see our list of supported bills for this session. And please note that LWVMA advocates for whole bills or policies that we already support on our supported list that have been added to the budget. So the budget is massive. Eliza's going to get into all that. The budget is massive, and we can't support or advocate for everything. So we focus with razor-like precision on the bills and policies already on our agenda. So, for example, the Civics Project Trust Fund line item that we fought so hard to get in place, we advocate for that funding. The Immigrant Legal Defense Fund, it was funded at $5 million in FY26, and it'll be higher, fingers crossed, for FY27 budget. The Access to Counsel and Evictions line item we fight for every year. So those are just a few examples of the bills or policies that we support organization-wide that we'll go ahead and advocate for in the FY27 budget. Let me just get a minute here. Okay, so this program is being recorded, and the recording and slides will be shared and posted to all the attendees and posted to our website tomorrow. Eliza will brief us for about 15-20 minutes and then take our questions via the chat. So if you can, please stay muted and hold your questions until that Q&A section of the program. So Eliza Lutz has served as State Senator Pat Jehlen's Budget and Policy Advisor for nearly 4 years. She has a bachelor's degree in behavioral economics from University of New Haven and a Juris Doctor from Suffolk University Law School. Her advocacy portfolio includes housing, LGBTQ plus rights, the environment, and criminal justice reform. Welcome and thank you, Eliza.
Thank you so much, Jen, for inviting me to come and speak to everyone. Definitely excited to, sort of get this project going and help everyone understand the budget process at least a little bit better. I know that the state budget is, as you alluded to, can be a large, mystifying document. And so hopefully any information I provide at least makes things a little bit digestible for people going forward. You wonderfully already commented on my background. I've worked for State Senator Pat Jehlen. I'm her budget and policy advisor. Been there, it'll be 4 years at the end of next week. I've been, I help her with housing, environmental policy, LGBTQ rights, education policy, immigration policy, which I don't have listed here, but, you know, pretty much everything that she's working on. And as it relates to the budget, I have a finger on helping her trying to get past. And so hopefully I can pass on some of that knowledge on the process to you all. So what is the state budget? It is probably one of, if not the biggest pieces of legislation that gets passed every year. It appropriates funds to all sorts of programs and partnerships throughout the state. It is constitutionally mandated that we do this. And even if it wasn't constitutionally mandated, it is extremely important because it is what governs how the state runs. It pays for our schools, transportation services, courts, pays for mine and every other government employee's salary. Uh, all sorts of essential services that are provided to the residents of the Commonwealth are funded through the budget. Before we get too deep into things, I do want to introduce the concept of the line item. This is sort of what a lot of the budget revolves around, and it's the allocations to specific programs. You'll see them usually in this framework. The first numbers there is just the category, that's the actual line item number. And then you'll get a description of what that line item is. So the example I have presented is for the New England Innocence Project to support exonerees, followed by how much money we would give that program. So every year, Senator Jalen really supports this program, and it's the smallest line item I could find. There are some line items that are 3 to 5 pages of the budget all their own. So they can be very complex or they can be very simple. I just sort of want to introduce this concept because it'll come up later as we discuss some of the process. So this is the general roadmap of how the budget happens every year. We start in January, where there's some hearings about estimated revenue, basically how much the state expects to take in taxes. And then the governor takes that information and presents her version of the budget. Around mid April is when the House really dives in and releases their version of the budget. They have their floor debates. Then in mid May, the Senate repeats that process for themselves. Then starting in June, both branches come together to reconcile differences. And then finally, fingers crossed, by July 1st, the governor signs the budget. And now this is all very high level, and we're going to be diving deep into each of these sections. I just wanted to present this as sort of the general idea of, you know, the process generally takes from January to July, which is the majority of the legislative year. Uh, I have marked in red, we are here-ish. We are between the governor's budget and the House budget portion. And what that means is the governor has released her version of the budget, and the House is currently preparing to release their own version. And so, what that means in this step right now is the House and Senate are holding hearings on various topics. I believe housing was today, to hear sort of the governor and her team justify why they're funding things a certain way and listen to advocates broadly speak whether they agree or disagree with the governor's proposal. So that's sort of where we currently are in the process. Now I'm going to dive deep into some of the more specifics on this. So the governor's budget is submitted roughly in January. It is titled either House 1 or House 2 or H1 or H2. For those who don't know, we operate on a 2-year legislative cycle. So whether it's H1 or H2 is based off of which year in the cycle we are in. We are currently in the second year of the cycle, so the current budget is House 2. Since the bill has been published, House and Senate Committees on Ways and Means are holding joint hearings for the public on the budget proposal from the governor. So those hearings started with the governor and the treasurer sort of explaining their overall vision for the budget. And then as some of these more hearings come through, they're usually themed around various cabinet members and executive offices. So there's one on housing, one on health and human services, one on education, and where the secretary is on the cabinet for those topics will generally sort of explain why that portion of the budget is expanded on in that way. The public is allowed to submit testimony at this point, and there'll be non-government agencies that sometimes speak at these hearings to sort of provide their own input as to whether they agree with the governor's proposals or if there's changes they think that need to be made, and sort of start these discussions very early in the process. While these hearings are going on, the House Committee on Ways and Means, or HWM, will review the governor's proposal and develop their own recommendations for what the budget should look like. Once they release that, they send it to the floor of the House of Representatives, where it is put up for debate. The representatives can file amendments to the proposal, and those amendments are typically focused around line items, and it's usually increasing funding for particular line items, changing the line.
Oh, Liza, I think we lost you. Can you hear us? Okay, we'll give Eliza 1 minute. Um, Eliza, maybe you want to hop out and hop back in again, maybe. See if the audio is working. Sorry, folks, forgive the technical issue here. We will work on a remedy. Okay. Thanks, Fred.
All right. Where did I get cut off?
We were talking about amending, so increasing funding for a particular item, changing language, earmark. I think you stopped at earmarks.
Yes. Okay. So yeah, the members of the House of Representatives can file their amendments to the budget, which can take the form of increasing funding, changing language within line items, earmarking specific funds within line items, and adding policy sections to the budget. So I think here's where I want to sort of explain that the budget is not just a series of here's a program, here's how much money is in it. There are the line items themselves can, I mentioned before that some line items are 3 to 5 pages. Those line items will describe how the programs that they are funding are meant to operate. So they'll include restrictions or eligibility requirements within the line item itself, just to sort of explain how things work. So, for a common example, is I work a lot with the Rental Assistance for Families in Transition program, RAFT. There's various eligibility requirements and how much money an individual family can receive from that program every year. And the advocates like to have discussions about changing those requirements every couple of years. Right now I think it's like $20,000 every 2 years you're allowed to receive RAFT funds, and it might not even be that much. I think I'm being optimistic. But housing costs can go very quickly. And so if you run out of the advocates in that situation want to raise that cap because housing is so expensive that they run out of that program before the 2 years is up. So those are some of the situations where amendments are introduced to change those policies. As well as earmarking funds is for, sometimes a fund will be, here's $500 million for environmental projects. And that'll be the line item. And people will propose earmarks and say, I think 200,000 of that should go to the city of Somerville to install solar panels on government buildings, things like that. So those are specific earmarks. And the policy sections, there are specific policies that can be included in the budget. Um, you know, and people introduce amendments on this for a variety of political reasons. Some people are using the budget as a last gasp of trying to get their bills through, just trying to attach whatever they can to the budget because the budget has to pass so they can get on it. They feel that there's a good chance of their bill being passed as well. Sometimes there's bills that relate to line items. For example, Senator Jalen has a food justice frontline bill that would create a trust fund as part of laying out this program. And so we might consider filing that as part of the budget to create a line item for that trust fund. So the gambit of amendments can run very wide. And it is the job of the representatives to duke it out among themselves about where their priorities lie and figure out what amendments will be adopted or rejected within the budget. Once the House has resolved all their differences amongst themselves, they will pass their final budget and send it to the Senate. Too long didn't read. The Senate does the exact same thing as the House. Is generally the same process. Senate Ways and Means will review the House budget as well as the governor's budget and come up with their own proposal. Once they do that, similar process, senators will file their own amendments to the budget and again have their own debates amongst themselves about where their priorities lie as a Senate. So once that process finishes, We have a Senate budget and a House budget. Great. They almost always have major differences between them. So when that happens, the next step is the conference committee. For every bill in the legislature, if there is a difference between a House version and a Senate version of a bill passed, a conference committee is appointed. It is 3 members for each branch for a total of 6 people. And it always, each branch has to include at least 1 member of a minority party. So, conference committee will be 2 Democratic reps, 1 Republican rep, 2 Democratic senators, 1 Republican senator, as based off the current makeup of the House and Senate. It is the job of these 6 legislators to come up with a compromise budget. They will be the final arbiters of what the final budget is going to look like. This is where you get a lot of the political trading between the House and the Senate. You'll hear discussions of people saying things like, oh, well, what if we cut this program? You want to cut that program. We want to cut this program. Let's make that trade. We want to increase the funding for this program. You want to increase the funding for that program. Let's match these. And there'll be discussions like that. Or you introduce this policy. We like that policy, but we want to introduce this policy too. There's a lot of discussions and negotiations that happen between the House and the Senate at this stage. Once those negotiations occur, the compromise bill from the report of the conference committee is sent to the House and the Senate for final approval. If the entire House and the entire Senate are on board with it, they will then send that to the governor. The governor has 10 days once they receive the final budget from the House and Senate to take some action. The governor can approve the entire budget, they can veto the entire budget, they can veto specific line items and reduce them, or the governor can also propose new amendments. If the governor does issue any vetoes or propose any amendments, they can be overridden by 2/3 majority of each chamber. Generally speaking, this process tries to be wrapped up by July 1st. If you saw earlier on the roadmap page, I put an asterisk on that. Within the past couple of years, that July 1st deadline has been, some would say, more of a suggestion than a deadline. But we do generally try to aim for that as a goal and have further discussions going forward from there. So that is sort of the big roadmap process of how budget happens on a procedural level. So what do? You all advocate for things. This is sort of the part where I wanted to say that while everything I've talked about so far is the procedural end, probably the advocacy side of budget is one of the most important parts of budget that happens because that is how we know what is important to people and where we want to see things funded. I think I saw a good quote from a prior version of this presentation that sort of what we fund describes our morals as a legislature. The things that we choose to fund are very important, and we want to fund things that people want to see in the state. So, as we hear from advocates, that is very beneficial to us taking those next steps. So, I sort of came up with a couple of general tips of how your advocacy can look going forward. Be consistent in your advocacy. Just because you get something at one stage in the process doesn't mean it's guaranteed. You've heard me talk a lot about opportunities for different people to offer amendments at different points, negotiations at different points. You need to be consistent and paying attention to the entire process in order to have the best chance of the things you want to happen happening. It is very important to just keep on us as a legislature to make sure that we don't forget about things. Probably one of the more important things, this is something that Senator Jalen has really taught me, is telling stories as advocates. We get inundated with so much data and numbers that we want that it becomes meaningless. You know, like, yes, we understand that if we increase this program's funding, we can help 50 more families get off the streets. Cool, that's great. What does that actually mean? And so telling stories makes these situations real for us. If you tell us the story of a family that is, or how you personally have been affected by being homeless, for example, that can be a powerful motivating factor for us to take that program seriously and understand the costs of not funding it adequately and what the consequences are for our actions as a legislature. Because if we just end up thinking in numbers, we lose a lot of the humanity aspects of what these programs are actually doing. And so I think that telling these stories is absolutely vital from an advocacy perspective. Third thing I think that gets under discussed is building connections, both within and outside the legislature. You want to build strong connections with a legislator to champion your goal. If you have a specific thing that you want to find a legislator who also really wants that thing. Because otherwise, if you don't have a champion for it, it's really hard to have a consistent voice day in and day out for it. You also want to connect with other organizations. Building a large, if you as an individual have something you really care about, that's great, but it's hard to move the needle by yourself. It's possible. I've seen people pull extraordinary things in the legislature as like a one person advocacy team, but sometimes it's not enough. And if it's a bigger thing that you're fighting for, you need more people on your side doing it. So absolutely keep building connections. And then the final point of advice is don't give up. Uh, the budget process can be, especially right now, the budget process can be very frustrating. We are in a tight budget year, which you either have heard or will hear a million times, which means that there are either cuts or level funding for a lot of programs. And so you're going to be fighting uphill battles, likely for the next couple of years, on advocating for the programs that you want. You can't let that discourage you. The Massachusetts legislature, for better or for worse, is a slow but deliberate beast when it comes to making policy changes and budget changes. Persistence and not giving up is crucial in seeing those changes come through. That's pretty much everything I have. Once this is passed around, I have some useful links uh, as part of the presentation. Budget and Policy Center. They are the policy wonks of budget. They the only people who know more about the budget than them are probably the Ways and Means staff. They are very good at digesting a lot of specific information for people. I highly recommend looking into their resources. The governor has a whole website dedicated to her budget recommendations. So you can search by line item or program name and figure out what she has funded it at, and also what the past 4 or 5 years of funding for that program have been. And then the state legislature, we have a website that sort of displays the whole process. And if you periodically check that, you'll see where on that roadmap I shared we are currently at. And that's also where you will see budget amendments, budget filings. Pretty much every document will be on the state legislature website. Yeah, that is pretty much everything from me. Thank you so much for having me come here, and I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you, Eliza. That was inspirational. And you're talking to policy wonks on this meeting. So that was inspiring and hopeful.
Yeah.
So let's see what we have in the maybe we could come off share and we're welcome to take questions in the chat. So Nancy Brumback asked, how closely does the final budget tend to reflect the budget the governor first submitted?
I think this changes depending on the budgets, whatever the budget session is, or what the situation is, excuse me. Um, and sort of how much wiggle room the legislature views that they have to play with. A
Mm,
lot of the times, I think the governor's budget tends to be a bit more lowercase c conservative fiscally, just
mhm.
because at the time that sometimes that is a deliberate policy choice, and sometimes it's because early revenue estimates tend to be lower than the revenue estimates that are coming out when the House and the Senate are doing their own budgets. So a lot of the times we'll see the budget will tend to increase by the time it gets back to the governor. Um, a lot of and then you'll also see lots of policy things that end up changing as well, because the legislature will come up with a new idea that they think should be part of the budget, and that will be added over the course of the process. So I do think that there do tend to be there might not be a lot of changes between the governor's initial filing and the final budget, but they do tend to be substantive changes, I think is the way I would describe that.
Right. I recall from one of the budget cycles for I'll use the example of the Civics Project Trust Fund line item. So we do have a champion in Senator Roush where she files the additional funds. So we have fought for that line item over the years, and I think Governor Healy had reduced the amount one year, and so we fought for a veto override on that. So that was one thing that we worked to get back up to the level that the conference committee offered on that project. Let me check the chat for more questions. Okay, from Ellie Goldberg. Years ago, there was an online spreadsheet where you could play with the figures. Huh. If you wanted to increase funding for one line item, you had to place a cut. It was very educational. Do we know if that's still available?
I wish that was still available. Senator Jalen actually talks about this a lot. She used to do a physical thing outside of her office, but what long before I started working there, of build your own budget, where, she would have like pieces of paper and like you had to fit them all within the grids, like Tetris style, to sort of represent like what you think the budget should look like. Um, Unfortunately, I don't know of any resources like that at the moment. Maybe the Budget and Policy Center has something like that. I wouldn't be
Oh,
surprised
that's a
if
good
they did.
idea.
Um, but I don't think, as far as I know, there's no such resource at the current moment. But I know that the senator has always thought about trying to do something similar again. So maybe someone can take that on.
That would be great. Nancy Bettinger asks, are there types of policy bills that work better than others as policy sections of the budget?
I think so. I think things that are, in terms of the way that, you know, the legislature has been moving recently, anything that has the potential of requiring money tends to be like the best fit for things that can be part of the budget. So for example, like I was saying earlier, we have a bill about a food justice frontline program that would create a whole program apparatus around supporting programs that are on the front lines of in food scarce areas.
Mm,
Um, that includes creating a trust fund to fund that program. And so that type of bill, the policy sections would be in their own section, and then we would also create that trust fund within the budget. So that those are the types of bills that are very easy fits and,
mhm, mhm,
have the highest chance of doing well in the budget.
mhm, mhm,
Other things such as like commissions have the potential to be funded in the future. So, for example, Senator Jalen has the Commission on the Status of Transgender People.
Yes.
We are considering filing that as a budget amendment, because even
Mhm,
if we don't ask for money for that commission in this budget, a lot of commissions get money at some point down the line. And so having that be part of a budget tends to be
mhm,
um, pretty consistent with sort of the way that budgets end up working.
mhm,
Um, there have been non-budget related, uh, policy sections that have been added to budgets before. They try not to do that too often. They try to keep the budget to things that at least there is some connection to money being involved with it. But
mhm.
theoretically anything could be um, attached as sort of a rider to the budget. But they try not to do that too often.
Mhm. Great, thank you. So that's a successful strategy. So great. Okay, Sue, great question. What is the league advocating for? I will make sure to convey that in all correspondence in the Action newsletter and Celia's weekly updates. I'm happy to communicate those line items. Sue also asked, is the budget labeled by section, or how would you, for the novice, how would you be able to find what you're looking for? Is there like an easy
Yes,
test?
if you do look at the actual if you find the actual H2 filing and download it, it will be broken up by generally sort of by like the executive offices and the branches of government. So the first section in the budget is the judiciary. Um, and you'll find in a I don't know if there's like a logic to the order, but everything related to the judiciary will be under the judiciary section. And
Mhm.
then
Okay,
there might be like the next section will be, maybe that'll be like public safety. And then you'll see everything related to policing and funding. Then there'll be a section on
got it.
education. So within the budget, things do tend to be close together. If you
Great.
learn, if you remember the example I gave before, there was a series of 8 numbers for the line
Mhm.
item. The first 4 numbers describe generally what category it's in, but you kind of just
Okay,
have to know what those are. So the one I showed was 0321, which means it's a judiciary line item.
got
Uh,
it.
when you are looking at the actual budget, you will see things that come in together and they are grouped together by topic like that. Just in terms of like the rhyme or reason as to why that is the way it is a little
Mhm.
bit, you just kind of have to know.
Right. And I'm happy to help folks with that. If you email me, we can always ask our friends at Mass Track. We can ask Mass Budget and Policy Center. There are tricks. It's not always very cut and dry. Sometimes we have to do some digging, but we're happy to work with you on that. That's no problem.
Yeah.
Put
God
in the
save you if the thing you're
chat.
looking for is an earmark within a larger line item, because then
Right.
you're really digging at that point.
Right. That's when I consult our friends at Mass Track.
Hmm.
Are there any other questions for Eliza? If you want to put them in the chat or if you want to raise your hand and come off mute, I think we have time for at least one more question. I think I got everything in the chat. Any other questions for Eliza? Okay, great. Oh, Tina?
Hi, yes, thanks so much for doing this. I'm wondering about the budget and the other money that comes from other bills. So for instance, the environmental bond bill, I understand in the bonding process that money isn't real. It's just voted for in case the people wanted, or the agency wanted to do a project, and then they have the money for it, get the money for it. So, does that mean that there's less money in the budget when people can count on a bonding process?
No, so the budget basically has to account for every dollar that the state collects in revenue from primarily taxes. There are other forms of revenue, but primarily taxes. So every tax dollar has to be accounted for in the budget, within margins of error, because we're dealing in billions and billions of dollars. Um, so I would say that typically what a lot of advocacy will do is they will look within both the budget and the bond bill to try to get things, because sort of what you say, bond money is sort of not guaranteed, because bond bills are authorizations for the
Right.
governor to create a separate alternate revenue source for specific topic areas, and that's entirely based on how many bonds the government can sell. So we can authorize the governor to get 5 billion in bonding, um, for environmental projects, but if the governor can only sell 1 billion in bonds, then only 1 billion in projects will get funded. Whereas in the budget, everything that is listed there is guaranteed to be funded at the amount signed by the governor.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Tina, we actually have an explainer, which I can attach. I'm just going to write myself a note. We have an explainer on bond bills because it's a similar but different type of process. So if anyone,
Yes,
we could have a separate event just on bond bills. So I'm happy to share that explainer with folks.
thank you.
Okay, Laura?
Yeah, my sense of the way the state budget has been created over many years is that it's somewhat chaotic. You seem to tell us that there is really a good process going on. Whether we like what comes out or not is another thing. Is that the case, or am I misunderstanding?
I think whether it is a good process or not is a personal thought for each individual to decide. I think that the thing that I do like about budget process wise is that it is very explicit and laid out compared to other pieces of legislation because there are much more strict deadlines for the budget process. Um, if you're looking at any bill that doesn't come through the budget process, you will know when it's on the floor for one of the branches about a week in advance for most people. Whereas the budget is something that it has to happen every year and it has to happen on this timeline. And so I think that's very good especially for people who are new to advocacy, to sort of really get involved in a process and know what the strict deadlines are and not have some of the chaos that could come from other bills where it's like, oh God, the bill that we want is getting to the floor next week. We have to gather all of our resources within the next 48 hours and get everyone mobilized on this really quickly. Whereas the budget process is so laid out, you can do that weeks and months in advance as needed. So I do think that that is a benefit of the process. But I think one of the downsides is that the budget is so big and there's so much going on that does create a little bit of chaos because smaller things can get lost in the shuffle. It's hard for everyone to prioritize everything they want to see in the budget. And anyone who says they can tell you everything that's in the budget is probably lying to you. Because I don't think it's possible for any one individual to know everything that is in there. So I think that that is sort of the nature of the beast on that front.
Great. And then Diane asks, how do municipalities ask for money?
So that kind of changes a little bit year from year. So there's some funding that is guaranteed to the municipalities. I'm forgetting the various chapters. Um, but there's various formulas that determine how much the municipalities get in terms of their own funds and for general purposes. If they want more than that, typically that tends to come from there's specific line items within the budget that are carved out for local projects. And so typically, at least on the Senate side, every senator typically is allotted some amount of money for local projects that they want to fund. And they will specifically say, okay, let's say every senator can allocate $300,000 to their district for specific projects. It then comes from organizations and the towns to go to their legislator and say, okay, of that 300,000, we have this $100,000 road construction project that we need done. And so they will go to their senators and their reps and ask for them to file amendments within the local project line items that exist. And there's ones for public safety, environmental things, housing projects, um, pretty much every like broad category, there's a local counterpart. And so it is generally just Ways and Means says we roughly know how much money we can give for these things. it's on the reps and the senators to ask on behalf of their municipalities. So for a municipality to want something, they should be in communication with their representatives to ask for it on their behalf.
And that's outside of the automatic chapter funding that they already get.
Yeah. That's
That's
outside
great.
of the automatic chapter
Yep.
funding they
Yep.
already get.
Got it. Awesome. Sue?
And this isn't strictly a budget question, but I guess I was a little confused. In my mind, I know that there's a budget every year, but at the beginning of a new 2-year session, when all of the new bills are being filed, is that why there's that cutoff at the beginning of March to have them filed? So, because then they move into the budget process?
No, so
It's the
those
third something in January. Sorry, go ahead, Eliza.
yeah, no. So that is just a deadline to try to have the legislature limit how many bills it has overall on its own. Um the legislature files, thousands upon thousands of bills every year as a whole. And so the deadline for that is just to make it so that there is time to try and review every bill and have hearings for every bill over that process. So it's not really part of the budget process for those things. That is just mostly so that, on top of the budget, the thousands of other bills that we have to look at, um, that there's enough time in the 2-year cycle to start looking at those in February and March and start having those hearings going forward.
So why is there so few hearings the second year of the session?
Because no new bills get filed.
Okay.
They hold all the hearings in the first year, and then we set a deadline of every bill has to have some action taken on it by a certain date early in the second year. And so that sometimes there are hearings because there are late file bills that happen in the second year. Um, so some of those will get hearings, but they're not guaranteed at that point. So all the hearing stuff just happens in the first year, and then action has to be taken on those bills by the end of the first year, basically.
Per the operating rules. Great.
Yep.
Okay. Eliza, you have been wonderful. So I hope everyone can come off mute or use their clapping emoji. Thank you so much for all you do every day. You've been a delight. We're so grateful to have you with us tonight. So thank you, everyone. We will send out the recording and slides and post them. And thank you again, Eliza. We really appreciate it. Take care.
Thank you so much. I really appreciated the opportunity.
Take care. Bye-bye.